In this video, we're going to talk about some of the pros and cons of using Bubble to build your no-code app. So we're going to be talking about the Bubble.io no-code app development platform. Is it right for you? We're going to be going through some information to help you make the right decision for yourself and for your app. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because we're actually going to go through some of Bubble's own FAQs. And while these can seem a bit high level when you're going through them yourself and therefore hard to make the right decision on, after guiding hundreds of entrepreneurs in building and launching their apps using Bubble as the primary platform, we have a lot of specific examples that I want to walk you through to help you, again, just make the right decision for yourself. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can launch their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses, all without coding and with no technical background required. So today, we're diving into Bubble. Now, before we dive in, I want to preface this by saying that this video isn't meant to convince you to use Bubble. There are lots of no-code app development platforms and tools out there, and you should really make a decision based on your own needs and goals. I'm talking about Bubble today because it's the platform that suits our own clients. It suits their needs and their goals. And that's really what you should base your decision on. And that's why I want to go through some of these details today, because at the end of the day, Bubble might not be right for you. And that's okay, but you need to be able to make the right decision for your app. So let's go ahead and just dive right in and go through some specific examples and details to help you make the right decision. Now I'm going to share my screen and we're actually going to go over to Bubble's FAQ page here. So you can see that they have this section labeled "Why Choose Bubble?" And there are a handful of reasons that they put on here, benefits of using Bubble. And, you know, when you read through these are all good points and they're things that you want to be able to take advantage of, but they're also very high level. And so if you're coming on and trying to make a decision on whether Bubble is right for you, you might not be able to apply these to your own situation, to your own unique app. And so this is what I want to go through and kind of talk about the realities of some of these and the benefits and potentially maybe some of the drawbacks, again, depending on your situation. So Bubble is designed to help you launch sooner. And Bubble on their FAQ page says that translating a design into a working application in Bubble is much faster than traditional development. And this can be true in a few different ways, or it might not be true depending on your situation. So this is definitely kind of an umbrella statement. It's generally true, but you have to look at a few different factors. One of these is going to be budget. I mean, in reality, if you have a really, really healthy budget, then you can hire a development team to probably build your app faster than what you yourself would be able to build using Bubble, because you have to come into this, number one, having to learn how to use Bubble, number two, having to learn how to build an app, the intricacies of development strategy, how to think about software, right? So there are other things that come into this. So if you have a really big budget, then you might not launch sooner by building your app yourself, even though there's no coding involved with using Bubble. You might be able to just pay a development team a lot of money to launch faster, okay? Now, the reason why generally Bubble is going to help people launch sooner is because most people don't have that type of budget. And so therefore, if you're coming onto Bubble and you don't have that type of budget to really be able to leverage the speed of a big development team, well, then you're certainly going to be able to launch sooner than if you were to go two other routes. Number one, if you are thinking about trying to learn how to program yourself, if you're trying to learn how to code, well, you're definitely going to be able to launch sooner if you learn Bubble instead. Absolutely. Or if you're thinking about trying to outsource and try to find a cheap option, it's probably going to take a lot longer for that cheaper option to build your app, especially in the way you want, than if you were to come on and use Bubble to build your app yourself. So again, a few different variables for you to think about. Now put yourself into one of those. What is your situation? And then you'll have the reality of, is this really going to help you launch sooner? So generally, most of the time, people aren't going to have the budgets for the big development teams, and they're going to want really just a higher quality of app than what they would otherwise pay to outsource really cheaply. Okay. Now moving down to the next one, Bubble says that, by using the platform, you're going to save time. It can take weeks or months for a development team to turn a design into a working application. Bubble closes the gap between design and development. Now, this is kind of similar to launching sooner, but I want to talk about these specifics here. It can take weeks or months for a development team to turn a design into a working application. I agree with this, but you want to break development up into different phases, because what happens with development teams often is when an entrepreneur gets in contact with them and goes through the initial process of discovery or wireframing, or essentially just trying to convey their idea so that the team can then build it. This is one of the things that takes the longest. And then when moving into development, iterating in order to fit that initial idea is what also adds on a lot of time. Now, this, in my opinion, is one of the big benefits of using Bubble. Bubble more or less gives you a blank canvas upon which to build your app. And a lot of people like coming onto the platform so that they can take exactly what's in their head and put it into an app. Now, we have a lot of our own clients come to us after having tried to go the outsourcing route at first, but then running into the obstacles that we just talked about, really just not being able to convey their idea. And I can't tell you how many times someone has told me that at the end of the day, nobody knows their own processes and their own visions better than themselves. And so often, for the first version of their application, it's easier for them to build it out themselves. And that can save time really just because of that process alone, taking the vision out of your head and putting it into an app. And so in that sense, compressing the development time, you're definitely going to save time when you're using Bubble. Now, having it take weeks or months for a development team to turn a design into a working application, this really depends. It really depends, because what is the app? That's one of the questions you have to ask, or rather one of the things you have to consider when looking at a benefit like this. Again, this is a generalization. It has to be, right, in order to make sense on this page. But some apps, when outsourced to development teams, are going to take months and months and months. Some apps are going to take maybe a couple of weeks, but you have to figure out where your app might fall on that spectrum. Now, I can tell you this from experience, again, in working with hundreds of entrepreneurs. The types of apps that they have in their minds are usually the ones that are going to take months and months and months for a development team to build. That's because, when you come into building an app, you have a really big idea. And when you work with a development team, in order to distill that into something that will only take maybe a couple of weeks to build, you have to strip it down to, the barest bones you can possibly think of. Now, you might think that you've already stripped it down, that you're coming in with an MVP. In reality, there's a very good chance your definition of MVP is much, much, much bigger than a development team's version of an MVP. So yes, using Bubble can save you a lot of time in taking the vision out of your head and getting it right. But when looking at this weeks to months, well, you have to really think about what your app is. Chances are your app is going to be one of those that's going to take months to outsource if you do, unless you're happy to strip back to, maybe a single core feature and that's it. Then you could get it up really quickly by outsourcing. So can you close the gap with Bubble between design and development? Absolutely, but just keep those different variables in mind so that you go into it knowing exactly what to expect. Now, moving down to iterating faster. Now, this is one of the biggest advantages I think you can have when using Bubble. So we talked about saving time, and that's great, but this section here is really looking at the time it takes to build your app. But it's not looking at all the time after that. And that is what a lot of people overlook when they're deciding whether or not to use the platform. Now, when you're building your app yourself, it could end up taking you a bit longer to build than if you were to outsource, or it might take you a little bit longer than you had initially planned. For example, a lot of people come into the no-code app development world thinking, I'm going to launch my app in 3 weeks or 1 month, and they're starting literally from zero. And they realize that that's not the reality. It's going to take a bit longer than that. We're looking at initial time spent, and yes, you can save a lot of time, but the most time saved, in my opinion, comes later. Because let's say you outsource your app. Well, okay, you can look at that time frame, you can look at that budget, you can look at all of that, but what about after that? What are you going to do with your app? Are you going to build it, the first version, and then leave it and that's it? Or are you going to launch the first version, bring in feedback, and start iterating? Obviously, if you want to grow a business or develop a decent product, you're going to have to start iterating and iterating a lot. You're going to get a lot of feedback because when you launch your first version, you're really testing for product validation. And that means if you don't start iterating quickly, then you're not going to be able to evolve your product to your users' needs. And so when looking at time saved, I like to look at those stages too. Your initial stage after you launch your first version, your beta testing stage, your rollout stages, your growth stages. What about then? Well, if you're working with a development team, you're outsourcing through all of that, it's going to take a lot of time because, and that goes back to what we were talking about here, a lot of time to convey your idea, a lot of time to go back and forth on iterations, a lot of project management time. There's a lot of extra pieces coming into play. Whereas when you're building the app yourself, all of those next stages, if you've built the core of your app and you understand how it's built, that means that as soon as you start getting feedback, you can iterate right away. I mean, literally within minutes of getting certain pieces of feedback if you want to. And that is just one of the biggest advantages you should be thinking about leveraging right now, because it makes again, those beta testing stages, your growth stages, so much faster. Now, that's not to say you have to do everything yourself. You can build an in-house team of junior developers, but because you have built your app and you understand your app, you're going to be able to help train them, onboard them a lot more quickly than just bringing in an outsourced team. So this one right here, iterating faster, it's such a big advantage, and I encourage you to think about this in the long term. Now, coming down to lower costs, Bubble says here that hiring an in-house engineering team generally requires a six-figure annual budget, even for small organizations. And with Bubble, you can build a fully functional web application yourself. Now, yes, you can save a ton of money by using Bubble, but I want you to think about this in a couple different ways. So not just comparing it to hiring an in-house engineering team. Yes, doing that is going to cost a ton of money. So if you're planning on building a product with maybe you outsource the initial product, maybe you have your own in-house engineering team right from the start. And if you're planning to continue on in that way, well, you're going to have a really big starting budget, and you're going to have a more funding as you continue. So if that's your plan, you're going to need a lot of funding, a lot of it. Most people, they either don't have that type of funding, or they don't really want to go that route. They want control over their own ideas, their own businesses, and maybe they'll put a little bit less money into the app up front, but they're not necessarily looking for, they're not looking to go from 0 to 1 million in a month. They want to build a more sustainable business. That's what we've talked about before. And that's what a lot of people are looking for, really a business that can help sustain their lifestyle, sustain the changes they want to make in their lifestyle, let them transition away from a job into a new app-based business, things like that. So with all that being said, you're likely not looking at getting just massive funding in order to bring an in-house engineering team on board. So how can the lower costs apply to you? Well, one, obviously, if you're building the app yourself, you're gonna save a ton of money. I would still plan on investing into your app, because if you literally do it all yourself, and especially if you've never built an app before ever, it's going to take you a long time. Okay, so spending some money up front, certainly not the 6 figures that you would have to if you are outsourcing to traditional development, but spending a little money up front is going to help you move a lot faster. But over the long run, and this goes back to kind of what we were talking about up here with iterating faster, you can lower your costs when you bring in-house developers on board using no-code tools. So one of the really cool things that a lot of our clients like to do is they want to build the apps themselves. They want to build the first version so that they can build it and they can understand it and they can know how everything works. They can get their idea out of their head exactly how they want to, and they can do it for a lower upfront investment. But that doesn't mean that they want to be a solo founder for the rest of the app's existence, because for the most part, they want to grow beyond that. They want to build a business or, grow their business with an app, and they don't want to become a developer. They want to become an app entrepreneur. And so a lot of them will bring junior developers in-house, but you can bring people in-house who don't have, engineering backgrounds. You can bring people in-house who don't even have tech skills, especially if you built your app without any tech skills. Are you going to have to spend some time training them? Sure, but that's something that you can build into a repeatable process. It's something that you can use other resources to help you do. And ultimately, you can save literally hundreds of thousands of dollars by bringing in junior developers after you build the first version, just to help with the day-to-day maintenance, right? This is something that it's not easy to do, in that you can build your app and then magically have someone come in and just maintain it. With any role that you're going to hire for a business, there's obviously some upfront investment that you have to make, but it's certainly doable, and it can help you save just a ton of money in the long run. And again, that's something that you want to think about. Now, going down to easy to use, hiring developers can be a major bottleneck for starting a new project. Bubble is easy enough for total beginners to use, so you don't have to invest in technical talent to get started. Now, this is one where I like to give people a reality check. Easy to use is often relative. So what is it easy to use compared to? Compared to traditional development, if you're thinking about going and learning how to code, learning how to use Bubble and building a custom app is going to be massively easier than learning how to code. Is it going to be as easy as coming on board and building your app within the next few weeks? No, not unless your app is just the simplest, single core feature that is super common, so you can find a lot of resources on how to build it. No, it's not going to take you a few weeks, especially if you don't have any sort of experience with tech. Now, you don't need to come in with a technical background. We have clients all the time come to us with no technical backgrounds, and you can learn how to use Bubble and you can build a custom app, and you can do that within a matter of a few months if you have the right process and the right strategy to follow. But you have to come into it, number one, being okay getting your hands on things, breaking things, testing things out, coming in and having sort of a mindset of enjoying solving puzzles. If you like to figure things out, then that's going to help you go faster. If you have correlating skills, so maybe you've worked with, even with spreadsheets in the past, those types of things can leave you coming in at least having a little bit easier of a time thinking about building a product. And do you need that? No, absolutely not. But it's not as easy as coming on board, clicking a few buttons and having everything just magically work. The reason is because most people come in with a much bigger idea of what they want their first version app to look like than what you would technically define as an MVP or a first version, for example. So most people coming on board, from what we've seen, when they're thinking, okay, I want to build my MVP, in their mind, what they're really wanting to build is a full scope, very complex, very custom application with lots of nuances, lots of different, really just complex features. And you can build all of that, but naturally it's going to take you longer. It's going to take you longer to learn how to do all of that. And so you have to consider that as well. What are you building? If you can strip that back, and you should, then you're going to be able to learn a lot faster, because it's kind of like building an MVP, right? If you learn the base skills, well, then you're going to be able to build on top of those as you expand your apps. You're kind of learning and building as you go. So is it easy to use? Well, not in the way that most people would like to think. Most people would like to think they can come on and, build Twitter in 2 days. Well, if you're starting at square zero and you're wanting to build a really complex, custom, full scope app, it's going to take you longer to figure things out. Can you figure things out without a tech background? 100%, absolutely. You just have to think about development strategy. So it's not just about using a tool, because if you learn how to use Bubble, well, that's fine. But if you don't know how to apply things in the right ways as you're building your app, if you don't know how to build the right things at the right time or test different things at the right time, it's going to make your process a lot harder. So you just have to think outside of the tool itself and think about building an app as more of an all-encompassing process. And then by default, that's actually going to make things easier for you, because otherwise, if you start using a tool, you don't really know how to apply it in the right ways, and you're just going to build things incorrectly. And that's going to give you problems later on. So hopefully that gives you some perspective on the ease of use. Think about the type of app you're building. Think about your mindset coming into this. Do you want to learn how to use a tool? Some people are just coming to the platform as a means to an end. They need an app and it's the only way they can get the app they want, but they don't really want to build one. Your process is naturally going to be a little bit harder, right? So you have to think of all of these different factors when you're coming into that. So I hope that's helpful for you. Now, the last one is powerful. So Bubble is powerful enough to build fully functional and scalable apps and is extensible via JavaScript plugins and APIs. So this is a big question that a lot of people have. Is my app going to scale on Bubble? Now, we're not going to do a full deep dive into this because we have a number of other videos that talk about scalability, just from a non-Bubble perspective and from a Bubble specific perspective. So we won't go too in depth on that. But when you come into using a platform like Bubble, using any no-code tools really, and you're thinking about scalability, a lot of this just depends on how you build your app. You can build the same exact app in two ways, one in a scalable way and one in an unscalable way. You can be building the exact same app because there's no one way to build an app. And so you really have to understand how to build a scalable app if you want to build a scalable app. An important thing to understand is this is true with traditional development as well. If you are coding, you have to understand how to create a scalable app in that scenario as well. It's just no different. Bubble as a tool, as a platform, is Bubble itself scalable? My answer would be yes. Now, most people come on thinking about 10 years, 15 years in the future. They're thinking, okay, I don't currently have any app. I don't currently have any customers. I don't currently have any experience in launching or growing a product, but I want to make sure that the platform that I use to build this very first version is going to help me once I've scaled to 10 million users, however far in the future that is. That's how a lot of people think about it. And I love the optimism and I love the forward thinking, but there needs to be a reality check in there, because if you're thinking that far ahead, then you're never going to be able to get started. Now, going back though to the question of, is Bubble scalable? We don't personally see people coming onto the platform and then running into scalability issues unless they've built their apps incorrectly. And so that's something that we emphasize a lot. Be less concerned about the platform, be more concerned about whether or not you're using it correctly, because that is ultimately going to make the biggest difference for you. Now, I will say that at the time of recording this, Bubble just raised $100 million of funding, and a big chunk of that is going straight to their engineering team to continue making the platform or make apps that are built on the platform more and more scalable, to really just support scale. Because as more apps are built using no-code tools, they're going to continue scaling, and the tools that they're built with have to continue scaling with them. And that's what Bubble is doing. So I would be less concerned about the platform scalability, more concerned about, are you actually using it correctly to build a scalable app? Now, to the second point here, the platform is extensible via JavaScript plugins and APIs. This is an important thing to consider, because if you're coming onto Bubble and you're trying to figure out, is it going to allow you to build the technical features that you want to build? Mostly yes. Now, obviously, I can't give you one yes or no answer to every single possible scenario. But the reason why I say mostly yes is because, as I mentioned before, Bubble essentially gives you a blank canvas. So you can build most of what you can imagine. But if you can't natively build something on Bubble, you can use plugins, APIs. You can add custom code if you want. You certainly don't need to. So you don't need to know how to code, but you can add it if you want. If you don't want to build something on Bubble from scratch, you want to use a third-party service, if there's an API available, then you can likely connect that to your app. So don't think just Bubble, think Bubble as the hub, which is what we encourage, and what you can add around that to help as you grow and expand your app, to help with your development process, to help you prioritize certain features. And so you can expand your app beyond Bubble alone. And that's something that most of our clients do as well. So I know that a lot of this can be high level, and I want to give you just the reality checks on all of these. Is it really going to help you move that much more quickly? Is it really going to help you lower your cost by that much, right? Maybe, but it depends on your situation. So it depends on these different variables, and that's what I wanted to lay out here today. So hopefully this is helpful. And again, we have other videos that deep dive into a lot of this, but hopefully this helps you move forward confidently with your app. Or, if this means that you don't feel like Bubble is right for you, then hopefully it helps you move forward confidently in another direction. Now, if you are taking the next step from here, you've decided, okay, I want to use Bubble, and you want to start building your app correctly. Because remember, it's not just about the tool. You really have to couple the tool with the right development strategies, the right testing and launch strategies, if you really want to be able to leverage all of these things. And if that's you, if you want to take those next steps correctly, then head over to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop for a free training where we'll guide you through how to plan out your development stages, your testing stages, and ultimately, again, leverage all of those benefits that Bubble can offer. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop for that. All right, I hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.